Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ecosystem Experience. You know, one of the great things about ecosystems is getting to meet this incredible mix of people and businesses at all sorts of stages of the journey. And today I'm meeting with a couple of fantastic folks out of a startup that's been around for a little bit of a time called Cartesian, that is in the marketplace and ecosystem space. These are two wonderful people from Melbourne, Australia, Nikki and Yaniv. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi.
Thanks. Hey.
Good to speak to you. This is quite iconic because you were one of the first people that we spoke to right at the start of our startup journey. And that was nearly 2 years ago. I can't
Was
believe
it 2
it.
years already?
Yeah.
Wow.
Year and a half, I think.
Yeah, okay. I remember that email because it was a contact of ours who reached out to me and said, hey, you've got to go and have a chat to these folks. They're in this sort of space. And it's something I have utterly adored in my career. There have been multiple times I have sat with, had conversations with, partnered with, been on the journey with teams like yourself, building and watching those journeys. It's incredible. So thank you very much for joining me on my one, because this is an early episode in the journey of the ecosystem experience. And it's so great to have you two here today. So for those who don't know, and I'm going to guess there's quite a lot of people who probably don't yet know, what is Cartesian?
So we help SaaS companies to fuel their growth by really activating their partner ecosystems. And whether that is like apps and integrations, and a lot of ecosystems are just partners you might work with. But we do that in a really interesting way. We actually use agentic AI to activate all parts of the ecosystem and get that flywheel going, which is really essential for actually driving growth in an ecosystem.
So is it solely marketplace and like transactional growth, or is it more than that?
It's much more than that. So, and you will know this. I know that you were part of some really big ecosystems that were like very marketplace and integration focused. And so it was very focused on transactions and driving things like GMV. But the majority of ecosystems out there are very partner led. So it's working, very closely with system integrators and consultants and partners like that, who together you grow their business, and that partnership will help both of you grow your businesses. And that's really the majority of platform ecosystems out there. And so we can do both. We work with both.
Yeah, and it's super exciting. It's one of the reasons that I remember the early conversations was around Atlassian, around the Atlassian marketplace, and looking at how we can bring, well, actually, I mean, we were saying it was 18 months ago, and the term agentic was still a brand new foreign concept, and where does AI play? And I know we were looking at like, who are the experts in the market that we can go and find? And I think that's a great opportunity for all sorts of startups and passionate people to come into this sort of space. But as we think about marketplaces, up to this point, they've been very much a destination, haven't they? They are, I will build a thing. It will exist probably on my domain, on my brand somewhere, but it's not going to be in my products. It's going to be sort of separate sort of thing. Do you think that's the classic marketplace? Do you think that's where we're at? And do you think that's what the world of tomorrow looks like?
Yeah, it's, it has been, hasn't it? It has been very much the model that you build this group of third parties, whether it's like consultancies or applications, who sit on a separate part of your platform. We're rapidly evolving into a new world where so much more of what we're using is completely integrated. So having a separate marketplace to your platform just it's not cutting it with users anymore. It needs to be part of your product and part of the whole more integrated experience. And that's what we're seeing. And that's what we're working in as well. Much more about integrating that whole experience.
And I think this is the, oh, sorry, Yanniv, you go. Yep.
Yeah, no, I just think that in a more fundamental way, the old marketplace was really modeled after the search engine. And if we look at what's happening in the world today, the old search engine model is going away. People are no longer searching as much using search engines. Even with Google, they have their AI answers. But more and more of that those operation goes into things such as ChatGPT, who are agentic. And that experience, if you have something that is search based, you have to keep up with that experience. People now have higher demands from those things that they interact with. So just by sheer force of market evolution, I think that model has to go away. People will not have that as an experience.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, there's been countless articles about marketplaces and partnership platforms that have suffered from the SEO to AEO type mindset shift from that external discovery point of view. I know I've spent quite a lot of time talking about how marketplaces have moved from being this destination to being this platform, to being a recommendation platform. And I know, Yanniv, you've talked historically in our conversations about contextual recommendations. It's that sort of thing of the user is where they are in that mindset of I'm building a report or I'm writing this piece of something rather, and the AI tooling or the recommendation says, hey, there is a tool that can support you in this. It can bring that data to you or something. Can you paint a picture of what you think that looks like in practice? How does a vendor
Yes.
get discovered? How do apps work in that sort of recommendation world?
Yeah, it's an exact question because it is still evolving. And actually, one of the exciting things about agents is, well, two things. Is first of all, the way that we interact with them and they interact with us, they're much more proactive. And the other thing is the ability and the tooling around and their entire capability of getting context and kind of working off that. So when we're talking about contextual recommendations and how we use agents, is basically a more proactive agent that sit in your environment while you're doing work. Tries to understand what you're doing, try to get the context from your work. So you gave an example of a report. If you're working on a report and that agent, for example, as we see, there are a lot of marketplaces now that sell data sets. For example, you can see that on Snowflake and Databricks. That agent can say, hey, actually, there's a data set I can bring here that you can use. That is something that a lot of the time for people who work on those tasks don't have front of mind. One of the things that we talked a lot about when we started is the amount of times that when talking to consultancies and being a technology consultant for a while myself, the amount of time that people bring you in to try and build something that is already a product that you are aware of and they should use rather than building. And I think that is something that happens still a lot in our industry. And the opportunity here to say, hey, there's actually something that can make the work that you're doing better, is an opportunity that comes from having the context of what you're doing and kind of more intimate understanding of what that thing is, and then finding the right time rather than you having to go out and ask, hey, can I get data for this? Or can I get an app that does that or an agent that help me with this? So I think that's how we see ecosystems evolve. And that's the product that we're building.
And it goes back to what Yanniv was saying about the search, like, search, fundamentally how we look for solutions really changing.
Yeah.
Is that we have these really powerful tools. And you mentioned like 2 years ago, like we were talking about agents. And 2 years ago, when we started talking about agents, we had to explain to everyone what an agent was. Like it was such a novel thing. And then a year later, suddenly, like it's just becoming
Everywhere.
part of,
Yeah.
everyday life now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that the real understanding of how powerful agents can be, we're still coming to terms with that. And rather than just being able to search, we're able to actually proactively understand what we're trying to do. And that is something we've not seen.
I think
Unfortunately.
that's, yeah, you're both so spot on there as well. It's that whole thing of, we used to say data was king, right? And actually, data in and of itself is by and large useless. Context is king. Data in context is where it is unlocked the power, right? That's what actually allows you to use that sort of stuff. And I think what I'm hearing from our conversation today, but also I've had from you in the past, is developers have to think about how they're building the next generation of apps to sit into a marketplace, not just as I'm a data set in and of its own right, or I'm an app in and of its own right. I'm a contextual layer that helps the user. I understand what the user's trying to do, and I can take them on the journey, because I think we're about to go into a market where, again, destination place, you go looking there because you kind of know what you want already. But I think in this agentic world, in this modern world of apps coming to me, I don't always know what's possible. But the AI can come to me and say, hey, did you know I could do this for you with this new data set, as Yanniv pointed out, or with this new piece of the puzzle? And you go, oh, I didn't know that. So, Nikki, thinking about that, how do vendors build a go-to-market strategy and drive that visibility, which is critical for them in this sort of modern world?
Yeah, it's interesting. You will know this, that up until now, ecosystems have been really won by vendors. There's a really long tail of vendors who don't win in ecosystems, right? There's that sort of very very high peak of vendors who have built really big businesses because they've sort of nailed the marketing game in ecosystems, and they've built really big billion-dollar businesses, and that's amazing. But what we're going to start seeing is, with more of this context coming out and more understanding about users and more understanding of what's actually needed to orchestrate workflows, and how do we build tech stacks, how do we stack agents, and how do they work together, especially with this flooding in of agents. We have to know what users need and what they're actually going to use. Otherwise, we're just building for the sake of building. And so I think getting that understanding means we're going to start seeing much more useful agents and applications being built. And that's where we're going to start seeing where the value is. And those bigger players, even though they'll sort of lose their competitive advantage of that marketing, they're going to be able to invest more in actually building for users as well. So
Yeah, I think this plays into that whole sort of the tightness of the product team with the marketing team, right? Really understanding the customer's needs, and driving into that sort of space. But we're talking here around agents as an offering that is a user of a service I can go and purchase and bring in. Yanniv, there's another angle here as well, though, of agents operating in an ecosystem on behalf of a user. What are your thoughts around that sort of world as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's one that has actual implications both on the user and the platform. So as a user, I can probably get agents to do more of my work, and it actually might be beneficial to kind of stop and kind of define what we're talking about when we're talking about agents. Although 3 months ago, definitions were a lot more murky than they are now, but we are talking essentially about a piece of software that uses AI models to kind of create the logic of what it's doing and interact with other systems using what we call tools, right?
Yeah,
So because of that, there's a lot more flexible logic that we're kind of offloading to the models. Do that for me. Okay. We're no longer have a kind of rigid task that those things do, rather than we're asking them to do things with the tool that they have. Right. So I can have much more versatile agents than before. If I had a very strict workflow application for, specific regulated processes in my company, and then I had a completely different workflow for product people, I can probably get the same result with a single agent saying, orchestrate this for those people and orchestrate that for these people. Right. So I can have much more versatile solutions. But that also means that I'm offloading a lot of the interactions that users have with the platform to those agents. So some of the business models are just shifting, because I might not necessarily need as many users as I had before for the platform, because a lot of the work is being done by agents. So the per seat model is taking a hit there. We need to understand that.
and the
Um,
upsell. feature upsell model
Yeah.
as well. Like if you're, relying on features to grow your LTV, but suddenly someone can build their own agent to do that, that's becoming a problem. We're seeing that more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting as well, because then the agent isn't being swayed as much by. Sorry, again, we're in the sense of there's the set of agents, as you articulated there, that help me in my day-to-day work, as a compliance person or as a banking person or something like that. But there's also agents that help me then as just a user who might do the purchasing on behalf of my company out into the ecosystem. And that's the interesting angle there as well. But that agent, as you're both sort of saying, is making generalized decisions. It's making, ones and zeros type decisions versus emotional, this feature saves me or this feature helps there, that a human would make in that purchasing decision. So I wonder what happens when agents actually take over the purchasing or integration decisions from an ecosystem as well. And how does that play out in a partner and a vendor world?
That's
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 interesting.
yeah. There's one thing that immediately popped to mind, and that's a saying that we keep saying to ourselves when we're saying that people buy emotionally,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Agents don't buy
No.
emotionally.
People buy from people. Do agents buy from agents? So I think that,
Maybe.
right? So I think that this is yet to play out, and we're watching this quite closely now to see how far agents will go in making decisions that are really have been traditionally emotion or at least people to people led, right? And so we're looking at where agents interact in those buying decisions, which are still very people focused. So you can give an agent can get all that buying information, but at the end of the day, a person will always still, at this moment, make the purchase decision. We're
At the
seeing,
moment, yes.
At this moment is a load bearing phrase here, because
Exactly.
we are seeing, Google came out with AP2, which is essentially an agent payment protocol. Agents will eventually have that agency, but it's something that, as an industry, we need. The protocol is one thing, but we do need to kind of have business decisions and definitely regulatory decisions around how that is being orchestrated. What do you do when using that protocol, an agent did make a mistake, an agent did purchase something that can bankrupt you as a business because it had the agency. So there's still a lot of legal stuff that we need to figure.
Yeah, you're right. And we're already sort of starting to see this emerge again in the commercial market or the consumer market, where, there's been videos online of people setting up agents to go shopping and buy the next set of shoes for you or the next coffee cup or whatever it might be. But those aren't necessarily life and death situations. I did see one the other day, though, booking airline tickets, which is a little bit more like you don't want to get stranded somewhere by having the wrong return flight purchase or something like that. So there's a little bit more risk involved in that. But I think, Yanniv, you're right there in the complexity. And I think in some ways, in my thinking, I think we'll see this maybe emerge in the smaller end of market where those decisions aren't as complicated. The top end of market, if you're buying a snowflake or something like that via a marketplace, you're still doing pre-sales calls. You're still having people involved. You're still having conversations there at this point in time. But again, we're seeing a high emergence of agents doing voice conversations, taking appointments, doing the first call deck, that sort of stuff. That is going to evolve very quickly. We've got cases in Australia where AI is doing things with agency that maybe it shouldn't. It's exam time right now. I just read an article this morning of a platform doing analysis of student work, and it flagged a particular student as being potentially AI involved in the student writing their thesis or their document or whatever it might have been. And the AI was supposed to be a tool for a lecturer to review it, and the lecturer didn't review it. And so the student gets this note, last paper of the year or something rather, and freaks out. Take that and put it into the commercial world where you've given an agency to do something, but you're supposed to have a human layer, and then the human doesn't do something and just says, oh, yeah, that's fine. The AI's checked it. I think, Jan, your comment there of it could purchase something, it could install something, and you're not going to realize the risk until the data's leaked or until the database has been deleted or until something catastrophic happens. So I love this world. I think it's going to change, but it's going to be interesting to watch regulation, compliance. Going back to vendors, I think what's going to be critical in this place is, you're talking before about understanding the consumer and the customer and the agent needing to do that. I remember the whole compliance side of things. So a lot of vendors having to go and do ISO compliance, make sure they're HIPAA compliant for that market, make sure they're GDPR compliant for a certain market, those sort of things. Agents are going to be ruthless looking at the ones and zeros. Have you done your ISO certification? When was it last updated? Have you submitted that? So I think the onus is going to be on a lot of vendors to make sure their details are correct. I also think it's a great opportunity, going back to a comment we made before, of the smaller vendors being able to come to play. Nikki, what are your thoughts about how does this level the playing field? Does this potentially level the playing field for the new emerging players coming into ecosystems? Because that's often been a comment from them, like, how do they play better in these ecosystems?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we said earlier, there's, this has been a real shift, right? In this, it's a inflection moment in that we're in at the moment technologically. The barriers to entry are becoming much, much lower now. And we're already seeing this huge long tail of, single to small shops of developers developing quite powerful applications, which don't see the light of day. But I think that with more context and more ability to automate how we're actually using, discovering, orchestrating these workflows, we can actually start seeing more of those smaller players who are doing really good things, who are developing agents and developing applications that are actually pretty cutting edge, actually, see the light of day and actually get usage and feedback. And we're going to see much more ruthlessness in terms of getting use and growing, or just fading away. So we're already starting to see that with agents. There's that, if you're not getting used, you're basically seeing that graveyard of agents. We're going to start seeing more of that, I think.
It used to be the old Apple sort of thing, right? Everyone installed like 6 apps, but only ever used one or something like that,
Yes,
or whatever it might have been, sort of thing.
exactly.
Yeah, I know you and I have spent quite a bit of time at different points talking about security and enterprise grade and that side of things. We've sort of skirted around this a little bit here. Leveling the playing field for smaller players coming in, but selling to those enterprise type customers. What are your thoughts around how do they maintain security and governance? How do they get through? It feels like it's really complex. We're sort of saying, yes, go and innovate and play with some sort of stuff, but enterprise grade or security, what are your thoughts there for not just the smaller players, but particularly them as they're coming into ecosystems? How important is enterprise?
So obviously it's important, especially if you're selling to enterprise clients. There are a couple of angles here that we need to kind of consider. First of all, if your agent is working on a platform, depending on the sales or the contract between you and that client, the responsibility may lie on the agent developer or on the platform. If I bought something from the Atlassian marketplace, even if the terms and conditions don't say necessarily that this is on Atlassian, there is some expectation that Atlassian will protect me. So there's kind of a shared responsibility in that model. That is a really important thing for platforms to understand, because this kind of gives them some power. This is one of those things that they can bring into the conversation when we see those external agents being built. Because if I just went and downloaded something from the internet and that something integrates with my Atlassian instances, or if I'm using a platform like an N8N for building my own agent, I'm essentially taking that responsibility. And if I'm moving data from Atlassian where it's compliant into an agent that I didn't necessarily set up correctly, then that's on me, right? So there's kind of a big opportunity here for platforms to kind of show their worth still, especially when that per seat model is coming down. And platforms historically have mechanisms to deal with that. They have non-human identities been around for ages now. But that is also shifting. So, right, it's not just where the data moves to that is important. That's one aspect. But then who do you trust? Because again, agents are much more dynamic and more prone to change. So if in the old world, and we all done that, gave access to an app to my data, right? Essentially what I said is I trust this vendor and I'm okay with them doing what they're doing with the data, because even when they change versions, I trust this vendor. Now I'm saying I trust this agent because the person who wrote it is credible, but do I really trust that the model will maintain the same level of responsibility that it's starting with? And that could be something like hallucination, but we've seen with OpenAI, for example, the move to GPT-5 and the deprecation of previous models, behaviors just changed dramatically. I know a lot of businesses, small and big, that started to get behaviors that they didn't expect from those models just because the models got deprecated. So that's the other side. We need to kind of have mechanism that governs even after we approve that non-human identity. And there's some interesting work. Also, you introduced us to one startup that does some interesting work around that. And I think that we'll see more and more of that, because essentially you need much more dynamic governance than you needed before. You need someone to actually check what the agents are doing proactively all the time and kind of have this essentially more active defense. So that's a second phase. And the third, and I think the one that we're seeing more in the market of aspect, is just traceability. There are a lot of the early solutions were around traceability, where data comes from, where is it being placed. And it's good that we have as an industry that maturity, that those are the first solutions that are coming, because they're kind of the first gatekeeping solutions that we need. So those, I think, are the three main points that you
I think that one's a really interesting one, the whole traceability. It's not, to me, it's not just the rise of agents in and of themselves. It's agents created by the average employee, not necessarily, and highly likely, and probably not, a developer. And with the assumption is that a lot of developers have a grounding in security and in data sovereignty and backups and this sort of stuff, because it is their lifeblood and bits and pieces. Gross generalizations, by the way, I get it. But you think about the average employee in a business who has just been using Excel and, maybe Salesforce and some Tableau and things like that. And they're used to saying, well, I'll go and get that from over there. I'll export it as a spreadsheet. I'll bring it over here. I'll bring it into Excel. And then I'll do some manipulation on it, that sort of thing. And they're taking that concept and saying, I can do that with ChatGPT. I can just download that Excel file and just dump it into ChatGPT. It's the same as dumping it into Excel, is it not? And then they go, oh, well, hang on, I've got an agent building tool here. You mentioned N8N or others, N8N's integrations and everything else, but you mentioned those sort of tools, the rise of those. They go, oh, I've got that Excel. I'll just drop it into here. And again, they're treating it in that same mindset, not realizing, as you said, like that, is it built on the Atlassian platform? Is it built on the Snowflake platform? Is it built on the platform that I already inherently trust, that's already HIPAA compliant or already, banking regulation compliant?
Is it in the region that this data can live in?
Yeah, exactly. Is it in the region where it's supposed to be? That sort of stuff. And I worry about that. So traceability, accountability, and knowledge of that. The flip side is, of course, we're seeing a lot of enterprises just shut everything down. Like, you can't copy and paste, you can't do things anymore. And that's that knee-jerk reaction. It feels exciting. Also, it does feel awfully scary. But coming back from that a little bit then, so back to the reality of where we're at today, we've got this exciting future coming down the pipeline of smart ecosystems that bring knowledge to you contextually where you are. You'll have helper agents that are helping you determine, out of the 5,000 apps in this ecosystem, which are the 3 that matter to me. Out of the 5,000 data sources, which data sources are appropriate to me, that sort of stuff. And I think this actually, agents can lean in and go, compliant, in the right region, on the right data source, that sort of thing. Nikki, for vendors thinking about today, how do we continue to make it easy, or are we actually making it harder for companies to, one, build ecosystems, and for others to participate in these ecosystems?
So I think that it's always been hard to participate in ecosystems. And you will know this from having built ecosystems. I think it's the easiest part of participating in an ecosystem up till today has been actually just to get onto the ecosystem. And even that is a hard process, right? To get onto AWS's ecosystem is an 18-month process of hard work. And so it's always been a very hard thing to get on there and then try and make it successful for yourself. And that in itself is a hard job. It's hard to get any idea about who you're selling to and, what you're building for and what they need. Like it's a very opaque system. And so I think that in one sense, we're going to get more competition in ecosystems. But in the other sense, they're going to be much more active and dynamic with things like agents orchestrating the activity in ecosystems. So it will be, we will start seeing a lot more activity, and it will be harder in some senses in that you'll have more competition. But the barriers to entry and the ability to become successful will be much more dependent on how good your solution is rather than how much marketing money you have to drive that, right? And I think that's always a win-win because at the end of the day, the user is going to benefit from having more competition and more ability for a number of solutions to be able to actually succeed. So,
I think on the back of that as well, another thing with ecosystems, right, is they are a place to foster innovation. And if as you said there, it doesn't matter how much money you have from a marketing point of view, these systems are going to make decisions based on the framework, on the requirements of the user, on what you're offering. It levels that playing field, right? It
yeah.
allows you to come in as a innovative new player to an existing ecosystem and still have a place to play. So as you think about that going forward, what are you seeing today that vendors are getting wrong as they think about this transition?
Yeah, I think that I always go back to use case. Like the thing that vendors are getting wrong, and it's not always their fault. It's because these ecosystems and what platform users need is quite like it's unknown and opaque, and a lot of the times, and you will know this, even as a platform, it's hard to know what users need from your third parties partners. And I think what they're getting wrong is not focusing on the needs. There is I guess, a tendency to just build things and throw it out there and see what works. Whereas being really focused on what users need is always that's never going to go out of fashion, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Agreed. Yanniv, your thoughts? Are you seeing anything that you think vendors are getting wrong in this transition?
I think that we're still at the stage where agent build are too broad. And I think that maybe finding out, speaking of agent, I have a sick 8-year-old that is knocking on the door. Sorry.
That's all right. Do
Give
you
me
need
a
to drop?
second.
Yeah, you go and do
1
that.
second.
For me, the thought there at the moment around what they're getting wrong is I don't think vendors are yet thinking through enough of moving from that destination to in product and in situ. And by that, I also mean they're not rapidly expanding their APIs, their surface areas, their integration points. I think you to move from a external destination potentially built on another platform, right? Into something that's ingrained into your product, you have to move your thoughts, right? You have to expose your APIs, you have to expose your relationships, the data constructs internally, all of that sort of stuff. So I think for me, that's part of the thing there. Let's go back to Yanniv now that he's said hi to his
Yeah.
8-year-old.
Yes. So I think really narrowing down and focusing on use cases that matter rather than going broad is kind of a thing that you know everyone with a new technology is doing, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's very normal. I think that is probably the biggest one. And I think that also the second one, I would say, not really looking at that relationship with the platforms that they're working with. And that's both the platform that they're integrated with, but also the foundation models in the right light. And first of all, from a go-to-market perspective, if I'm integrated with Atlassian, that relationship and having that high trust and in-depth understanding of that platform that I'm working on, and those might be multiple for an agent, that's one thing. But the other thing is understanding the power balance with the foundation models like OpenAI and Anthropic, and kind of building the right business model on top of that, because that's going to be very important. Right now, the business models that we see are still subscription based and they're assuming a certain cost of the model. But that is based on the fact of what the models are costing now. We all know, but ignore that we consume those models. We consume them in like we're paying per token, and those tokens are highly subsidized by investors and now by circular deals with other companies.
Yeah. Partnerships.
But that, yeah, uh, but that's going to change, and at a certain point, it's going to change very rapidly. So I think the business models that we see now are still not aligned with that. So those are the two main things there.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and you mentioned it earlier on, right? That disruptive nature when your underlying platform changes something. It could be the model, it could be their business model, right? It could be their AI model, their LLM model, or it could be their business model. You suddenly are at their whim. Hey, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I know the three of us can quite easily carry on that conversation. But I want to thank you both for giving up some time, particularly with kids at home and other things, the joys of working at home. Thank you so much for coming in. As we wrap up, I have one last question for you both, and you're not allowed to answer this with ChatGPT or Claude or AI. But what is the one tool today that you can't live without? And we'll start with Nikki.
Tijan? Am I allowed to say
Oh, come on,
that?
that's a little bit loaded. Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Just kidding. One thing I can't live without. I think um, I think day to day, honestly, can't live without my podcast app.
Nice.
No, but we do use a lot of those tools like Claude and Anthropic. They are totally ingrained in how we work today. I think that we can't build our business today without using those. And for me, every day, I think the thing that I can't live without is granola. Um, I absolutely cannot uh, imagine having worked before I could automatically take notes and have it summarized for me and like have it sent
Wow.
to a certain space.
Yeah.
Like those tools are so game changing.
Massively. And it's
Yeah.
amazing how quickly we've all pivoted to these things becoming as ubiquitous in our lives as Excel and other things as well. Yanniv, for yourself?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's going to be a very old-fashioned answer, but I have a distributed team and a distributed family and a distributed ecosystem. So I can't live without Slack and WhatsApp. I just can't. It's not going to happen.
Communication. Yep.
Yeah. So.
Yep. Brilliant. I love it. Hey, listen, thank you thank you both so very much for coming and joining me. Folks, that brings us to the end of this episode. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this. Keep your comments coming. Always love reading those, and we'll see you. Hey, interrupting this, Editor Kieran here. It's December here in Australia. We are racing insanely fast towards Christmas, and so we are taking a break from the ecosystem experience. It's been a blast shooting the first season or the first year of these things. Hasn't been a year, of course, it's been like 6 or 7 episodes, but it's been fantastic. We're taking a break for the crazy season. We will be back with some incredible guests in 2026. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Have a fantastic holiday break, whatever you get up to. Merry Christmas and enjoy the season. Bye.